welcome once again to Quick Trivia with Mike, that weekly quiz show where we test your knowledge of trivia. Somewhat obscure, but always lots of fun. I'm Mike Brever, your host for the show. I hope you're having a good time with it. We've got some really good questions for you today. However, as you know, we always begin by going over the questions that we gave you last week. So why don't we get right into it, shall we? We told you last week a little bit about an Irish song. You know it as Danny Boy. It actually, as you remember, was two separate things at one time. There was an acoustical tune called Londonderry Air, and then the words were added to it later, and it became what we now know as Danny Boy. I pointed out to you that this particular song played a role in the early days of television. There was a particular show that used that song as its theme song. And I asked you the name of the show or the star of that show. Well, the star that used Danny Boy as his theme song was a man named Danny Thomas. His show actually went by two different names. For the first 4 years, it was known as Make Room for Daddy. It eventually became the Danny Thomas Show. It was on the air from 1953 to 1964. Ironically, even Danny Thomas, how the name of the show changed, Danny Thomas changed his name as well. He actually was born Amos Muzyad Yakub Keros. He was born in 1912 and he passed away on February 6, 1991. He actually, prior to his television show, was most famous as a nightclub entertainer. He was a comedian, a singer, an actor. He was a producer and a philanthropist. You still see his name mentioned all the time because of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. Danny Thomas lent his credibility and his name and his ability to raise money to that remarkable institution. And even to this day, people know the name Danny Thomas because of his affiliation with the St. Jude's Children's Research Network. So there you have it. The answer to question number 1 was Make Room for Daddy, the Danny Thomas Show, or I asked you who was the star, and that, of course, was Danny Thomas. That was question number 1. Question number 2. We went off a little bit on historical trivia. We talked about the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, and we talked about its origins and the training that takes place there, etc. We asked you then, who is the only President of the United States to have graduated from the United States Naval Academy? Well, it turns out it was the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. He served from 1977 till 1981. And as you know, Jimmy Carter was a member of the Democratic Party. Previously to being president, he was in the Georgia State Senate. He was the 76th governor of Georgia from 1971 to 1975. In 2002, Jimmy Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in co-founding the Carter Center. You might also know him, just like Danny Thomas and his work with St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Jimmy Carter is noted for his philanthropic efforts and most notably with Habitat for Humanity. Jimmy Carter to this day is still active with Habitat for Humanity. He's a survivor of brain cancer, I believe it was. But he and his wife, in their 90s, are still very active with Habitat for Humanity, and quite frankly, a former president lending his name and his credibility to a nonprofit like that probably has created the credibility that keeps Habitat for Humanity on the radar of donors literally the worldwide. That was question number 2. Question number 3. We talked a little bit about the Watergate scandal and Richard Nixon. As you know, Richard Nixon resigned in August. He resigned the presidency in August of 1974 as a result of the Watergate scandal. The scandal itself began as a break-in of the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate apartment complex, which had a series of offices there as well, in Washington, D.C. The idea was that the campaign for Richard Nixon was trying to get some inside information on tactics that the Democrats might use. So they were breaking in, trying to get this. Turns out, that not only was there the break-in, but then there was an attempt to cover up the connection between the break-in and the Republican effort to re-elect President Nixon. This would have been for his second term. The scandal came to a head when it was revealed that there was a taping system in the Oval Office. It recorded telephone conversations and one-to-one conversations between President Nixon and anybody who was calling him or anyone who was in the office at the time. Congress, in the midst of an impeachment inquiry, subpoenaed those tapes. Turns out there was an 18.5-minute gap on a tape that was recorded 3 days after the Watergate break-in. The suspicion, of course, is that Richard Nixon was talking to someone not only about the break-in, but the potential to cover up the break-in and to use federal resources to aid in the cover-up. That, of course, was never actually proven because to this day we've been unable to actually retrieve the information on those tapes. The 18.5-minute gap remains void to this day. The tapes, however, are still secure, and if technology ever increases to the point where we can retrieve the information on those tapes, historians hope to be able to do so. My question to you last week was, who was it that Richard Nixon was talking to during that 18.5-minute gap? The answer was, of course, Harry Robbins Haldeman, commonly called Bob. He professionally went by the name, though, H.R. Haldeman. He was, in fact, Richard Nixon's chief of staff at the time of that conversation. He actually, after the phone conversation, but before the culmination of the Watergate scandal, he left the Nixon administration in April of 1973. He ultimately, because of his testimony to Congress in the middle of the impeachment inquiries, was tried on counts of perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He was, in fact, found guilty and imprisoned for 18 months as a result of his role in the Watergate scandal. After his release from prison, he went into private business, and he became a very successful businessman up until his death of cancer in 1993 at the age of 67. So there you have it. Question number 1 was the Danny Thomas Show or Danny Thomas. Question number 2 was President Jimmy Carter. And question number 3 was H.R. Haldeman. That's who Nixon was talking to during the 18-minute gap. We had several people call in this past week. And actually, we had, let me see, we had 3 people get all 3 questions correct. It was Jim Fry, Alex Hill, and Teresa Sundberg. All 3 got all 3 of those answers correct. Congratulations to all of them. In your own right, you are in fact champions of Quick Trivia with Mike for this week. However, as you know, we have a tiebreaker. there is bumper music that leads into the show today and it exits the show. I encourage you to pay close attention to that music. Identifying that music, which changes every week, is in fact the tiebreaker. This past week, the music was In the Sweet By and By, as performed by Elizabeth Cotten. Now you didn't know that, you didn't need to know that Elizabeth Cotten was the musician who played In the Sweet By and By. In the Sweet By and By was good enough. We had several guesses about what it was. Red River Valley, one of our guests didn't really have any guess about the music. Only one of the three people who got all three questions correctly identified the music. And it was the Hills. Alex and Barbara Hill. In the Sweet By and By was the bumper music for this week. If you didn't pay attention at the beginning of this show, I encourage you to pay attention at the end. Identify that bumper music, and you could very well enter the winner's circle for this coming week. However, as of right now, the Hills return as champions of Quick Trivia with Mike. Now we're going to take a brief pause, a brief intermission, let you get a bit of refreshments or something like that. We'll be back for the second half of the show in which we reveal the questions to this week's trivia answers, or questions rather, coming up next.
Hello. You know, when you fix an Italian food, everything has got to be just perfect. Especially when you're making a pizza. I'm going to show you. Looks good? You betcha my life. And it's delicious. That's the pizza you get at the theater. So hurry up. Get yourself some.
Well, welcome back to the second half of Quick Trivia with Mike. We've already gone through the questions from last week, and we've identified the Hills as our champions in the winner circle for this week. Let's get right into this next week's questions, shall we? You know I like to go a little bit into television trivia, especially back into the early days of television. This past week we talked about the Danny Thomas show from the 50s through the mid-60s. We're going to do that again. There were two shows that were very, very popular early in the days of television, completely unconnected to each other with two exceptions. One of them was Mission Impossible. It has actually two lives. First of all, it was known as a hit television series from 1966 to 1973. It also reappeared or rebirthed from 1988 to 1990. Mission Impossible was a series of weekly stories about a team of secret agents that would go and solve a problem on behalf of the United States government. There was the lead character who would receive instructions as to what their mission would be for the week. It always seemed to be virtually an impossible task, but by the end of the show, they had solved all of the problems. After the instructions, the directions typically were destroyed in some way, shape, or form, and there was always this catchphrase: should you or any member of your team be caught or killed, the secretary will disavow any knowledge of your actions. Oh, what a great tagline. I'm not sure that's a job that I would really want. Interesting thing about Mission Impossible, there were connections within it that some of you don't know. For example, Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, two of the long-running series stars, were actually married. And you know, there were things like that that went throughout all of it. So Mission Impossible later came back as a movie franchise. Tom Cruise, of course, is still actually producing Mission Impossible films. I think there's like 4 now, maybe something like that, but immensely popular. The second show we're going to take a look at is Gunsmoke. That mythical, almost heroic storylines that occurred in Dodge City, Kansas, with Marshal Matt Dillon, Chester, Doc Adams, Miss Kitty. Much of it took place right in the Long Branch Saloon, and then of course the action that took place in the rest of the town and out in the countryside. From 1957 to 1961, Gunsmoke from 1957 to 1961 was actually the #1 rated show on television. I told you some of the characters, Chester, Doc Adams, Miss Kitty. Really interesting thing about Gunsmoke is that some people that became famous in later life for other things, like Burt Reynolds, Dennis Weaver, they all got their start on Gunsmoke. And of course, long-running stars Milbourne Stone, Amanda Blake, they were on for all 20 seasons. Ironically, it was the longest running primetime drama in television history, a 20-year run, until Law and Order, about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago, surpassed it. A 20-some year run on television. Just a remarkable, remarkable accomplishment. Again, from 1955 to 1975. There's a second life to Gunsmoke as well. You know, I've also talked to you about the early days of radio. Gunsmoke started as a radio program, a drama on radio, which was immensely popular, and that's why it went on to have a long-running history on television as well. So Mission Impossible, because of a television series and then ultimately movies, and Gunsmoke, because of a radio series and ultimately television, have something in common, that they have a double life. There were 2 eras for that particular program. I'll tell you, there also is another connection, somewhat of a fraternal connection between the 2 shows that is not very well known, but it also is a connection between the 2 programs. So what is that connection between Mission Impossible, the television show, and Gunsmoke, the television show? We're not talking about Mission Impossible, the movies, or Gunsmoke, the radio. We're talking about Mission Impossible, the TV show, and Gunsmoke, the TV show. What is the connection between those 2 shows? That's question number 1. Question number 2. We're going to go off into Hollywood history. Marilyn Monroe, that sex symbol of the 50s that captivated audiences throughout America because of the immense role that she played in Hollywood at that time. She became the quintessential sex symbol during her era. Born in 1926, lived until 1962. She was a model, a singer, an actress. Typically, she played blonde bombshells, not always the brightest people, but always good-hearted people, a touch of humor in the characters that she played. And again, she was one of the most famous sex symbols of the 1950s and the early 1960s. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen. For those of you that are not familiar with it, Elton John wrote a song, Norma Jean. He actually rewrote it when Princess Diana passed away in that horrible Paris car crash. He changed the lyrics to fit Princess Diana. But the original version that Elton John wrote, Norma Jean, was written about Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe starred in As Young as You Feel, Monkey Business, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, The Misfits. She was married to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, the very famous playwright, some of the most famous people of their times. The Misfits, ironically, by the time that the Misfits were made in the 1960s, Marilyn Monroe had sunk so far into drug addiction. She also had immense pain from gallstones and endometriosis, that although her appearance in a movie virtually guaranteed its success, she became a relatively dysfunctional person to deal with on set. And in fact, Clark Gable passed away not long after the filming of The Misfits. And to this day, people wonder if it was so difficult to work with Marilyn Monroe on set that it potentially affected his very own health. Marilyn Monroe also had affairs with some of the most famous people of her time. Of course, dating Frank Sinatra is very well known. To this day, there are rumors that she potentially had an affair with JFK. Some people even theorize RFK. You'll remember that at Madison Square Garden on May 19th, 1962, she famously sang Happy Birthday to John F. Kennedy. And again, you all know now that she really sank into deep despair because of barbiturate drug addiction and also because of serious health issues that she had and a very taxing schedule. Again, her presence in a Hollywood movie virtually guaranteed its success. So producers desperately wanted her to be in these shows. On the last day of her life, and as you know, the coroner in Los Angeles, Hollywood, has determined that her death was a barbiturate overdose. The coroner determined that so many barbiturates were actually taken that day that it was not an accidental overdose. So the theory is that Marilyn, in the depths of depression, actually took her own life. But on the last day of her life, Marilyn said to someone, "Say goodbye to Pat, to the president, and to yourself. You're a nice guy." Who was Marilyn Monroe talking to when she made that famous quote? Say goodbye to Pat, to the president, and to yourself. You're a nice guy. Later that day, Marilyn Monroe passed away in her bedroom in her home in Los Angeles of a barbiturate overdose. Question number 3 today. We're going to talk a little bit on a whole new topic. We're going to go into college football. College football. We're going here because just yesterday the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have announced their intentions to postpone their football season until spring. They're going to try to get them into the spring season now. As you know, that's an amazing statement for a major conference like the Big Ten or the Pac-12 to take. Hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake because of advertising, promotional considerations, the sale of sports memorabilia. All of that is at stake with the decision that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 has made. But let's take a little bit of a look at the history of college football. The first game was played in 1869. It was played between Rutgers and the College of New Jersey. The College of New Jersey, of course, is now known as Princeton. The first rules were written in 1876, and it was done so in Springfield, Massachusetts. So college football has been around for a good 125, 150 years now, and it has an immense following. There are actually 6 stadiums in major college football right now. 6 stadiums that seat over 100,000 fans. Of course, the Big House in Michigan is probably the most famous of all of them. However, late in the 19th century, it wasn't the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Alabamas and the Clemsons that dominated football. It was the Ivy League schools. In fact, Walter Camp of Yale is actually known as the father of American football. It was an offshoot of rugby that was played at that time. The first game, the first school west of Pennsylvania to field a college football team was University of Michigan in 1879. From 1890 to 1905, it was such a violent game, and they had to rework the rules to try to leave some of that physicality in, but take the danger out. From 1890 to 1905, 330 collegiate athletes died from injuries that they sustained on the football field. Of course, now, when a very serious injury takes place, it's a phenomenon. Everybody in the whole country knows now if somebody has a serious accident. But again, 120, 130 years ago, it was very commonplace. College football is so popular that it has created the reputation for some schools, literally put them on the map. Football, Newt Rockne, they did it for Notre Dame. Until football came in with Newt Rockne as its head in the 1920s, Notre Dame was just a sleepy little Midwestern college in South Bend, Indiana that no one had ever heard of. In the 1930s, bowl games first came into being. In fact, one of the first bowls, the Cotton Bowl, Marquette University played in the very first Cotton Bowl. So bowl games first came into being in the 1930s. Three of the most famous coaches literally have dominated the game, and their name and their reputations are known throughout college sports. Paul Bear Bryant, 323 wins, 85 losses, 17 ties over a 38-year career as a football coach. 6 national championships for Bear Bryant. Newt Rockne, 105 wins, only 12 losses, 5 ties. Over 13 years coaching at Notre Dame, 3 national championships. Woody Hayes, 205 wins, 61 losses, 10 ties in a 28-year career coaching, primarily at Ohio State. Woody Hayes has 5 national championships. Between those 3 just gigantic college coaches, you have 14 national championships. One of those 3 coaches said, "I don't know what I would do if I couldn't coach." Probably croak. Which of those 3 coaches said that? Was it Woody Hayes? Was it Newt Rockne? Or was it Bear Bryant? I don't know what I would do if I couldn't coach. Probably croak. So there you have it, folks. Those are our 3 trivia questions for the day. Get your answers to me by noon on Monday. And of course, you all know by now there are multiple ways you can do that. You can email me at mbeaver@eastcastleplace.com. You can call me at 963-8425 and leave it on my voicemail. You can slip the answers under my door, or you can write them down on a slip of paper and give them to the front desk, ask them to put it into my mailbox. I'll be sure to get them by noon on Monday. Maybe you will be in the winner's circle next week. A little bit of Hollywood trivia, a little bit of television trivia, a little bit of college football trivia this week. Little something to interest all of you. Again, in addition to the answers to these 3 questions, identify the bumper music as well. That might be the thing that puts you into the winner's circle. That's our show for this week. I'm Mike Brever, your host. We're located right here at ECTV channel 955, right here at East Castle Place. I want to thank the president of ECTV, Tyler Gudex, our general manager, Laura Wengler, my producer and sometime research analyst, Scott McFerrin. He also is the gentleman who identifies the bumper music. So those of you that are enjoying that portion of the show, thanks Scott. I think he does a wonderful job on that. And of course, the artistic director at ECTV, Cooper Ledvina. Until next week, once again, I'm Mike Brever. This is Quick Trivia with Mike. I encourage you all to please stay smart, stay patient, and please, we will all be together again soon to enjoy that wonderful East Castle Place hospitality. So long, everybody.